The stars looked different from the edge of conquered space. Not cold, not distant, satisfied, somehow, as if the universe itself had arranged them for the viewing pleasure of those powerful enough to appreciate beauty at this scale. Supreme Commander Vethakaros stood before the observation glass of the flagship Eternal Dominion, his 4 eyes tracing the lazy spiral of the Orion arm like a painter surveying a canvas he was about to burn. Behind him, his bridge crew moved with the quiet efficiency of soldiers who had not lost a battle in 40 years. Ahead of him, precisely 1.4 million kilometers distant, sat the last populated human system, 3 inhabited worlds, a handful of orbital stations, and what his intelligence reports described, generously, as a defense fleet. Vethakaros had reviewed the sensor data 3 times. Not out of caution. Out of something approaching pity. "Show me the numbers again," he said. His second-in-command, Fleet Marshal Torin, stepped beside him and gestured at the tactical display. Current human defense elements: 9 cruisers, 22 destroyers, 11 frigates, and what appears to be a tender vessel of some kind. 43 ships total, Commander. Our fleet strength is 698 warships, including 16 dreadnoughts and 41 battleships. Torin paused, as if letting the mathematics settle into the air between them. Their largest vessel is roughly equivalent to one of our mid-tier destroyers in terms of tonnage. Vethakaros made a sound his species used when something was funny but not worth laughing at. And this is the species that once sent a diplomatic transmission warning us that they were, and I am quoting their exact words, not to be trifled with. "The same, sir. 43 ships." He pressed his palm against the glass. Beyond it, impossibly far and impossibly close, a pale blue star burned quietly. Sol, the humans called it, their ancestral sun, already surrendered 3 centuries ago when the collective swept through this arm and humanity scattered like seeds from a broken pod. Most had died. The rest had fled into the deep dark, carrying their wars and their stubbornness and their inexplicable refusal to simply accept what the universe had clearly decided about them. The colonies they'd built out here in the fringes were the last of it. The stubborn remnant. "We end this today," Vethakaros said. "Signal the fleet. Advance formation. Standard encirclement protocol. Leave nothing." He turned from the glass and took his seat at the command throne. "I want this concluded before their star rises on the first colony's morning cycle. I want it to have the poetry of a sunrise." The Eternal Dominion shuddered gently as its drives came to full power, and 697 warships came with it. The humans saw them coming. Of course they did. Even primitive sensor arrays would have detected a fleet this size at this range, the combined drive signatures burning across every band of the electromagnetic spectrum like a second sun. What the humans did with that information was, to Vethakaros, the more interesting question. His intelligence suggested they would attempt a fighting withdrawal toward the second colony world, using its gravity well to complicate pursuit vectors. A reasonable tactic. Futile, but reasonable. He was almost looking forward to watching them try. What they actually did was nothing. The human fleet held position. 43 ships, sitting in a loose cluster at the L4 point of the outermost colony world, engines at minimum output, no combat maneuvering, no formation changes. Just waiting. "Commander." Tactical Officer Serenine pulled up a sub-display. "Human communications have increased significantly in the last 4 minutes. Heavy encrypted traffic, high-compression bursts. They're talking to someone." "Each other," Torin said. "Last-minute coordination. Possibly recording their final transmissions." There was no cruelty in his voice. Just professional assessment. Vethakaros nodded but said nothing. Something was tugging at the edge of his 4-eyed perception, a minor note of wrongness that he couldn't quite name. The way the human ship sat so still. The communications traffic that felt too organized, too terse, for a panicking fleet. He had beaten 40 human fleets. He had seen how humans fought, with noise and chaos and desperate improvisation. This silence was unfamiliar. Increase sensor resolution on their fleet. I want detailed scans. The results came back within seconds, and Sarah 9 read them aloud. 9 cruisers, dimensions consistent with Resolute class or similar. 22 destroyers. 11 frigates. Tender vessel at the rear. All readings consistent with earlier intelligence. A pause. Sir, they are powering up weapon systems. Of course they are. Vethakaros settled back in his throne. Signal the vanguard. Engage. 40 dreadnoughts surged forward, preceded by a screen of destroyers and flanked by wings of their fastest cruisers. 600 kilometers per second, then 800, then past 1,000 as the collective fleet accelerated toward the human cluster with the confidence of something that had never been stopped. The humans held still for 3 more seconds. Vethakaros found himself counting, and then, at last, they moved. Not backward. Not into a withdrawal. Forward. 43 human ships accelerated directly toward 698 collective warships, and then they opened fire, and what came out of their weapons bays was not the energy discharge his shields were calibrated for. The first round hit the destroyer shattered mirror amidships and punched through the hull like a finger through paper. Not a crater. A tunnel. 32 centimeters across, 4 meters long, from one side of the ship to the other, a hole so neat and sudden that the automated damage systems took nearly 2 seconds to recognize it as damage rather than a deliberate opening. Then the round hit the reactor housing and the shattered mirror cracked open from the inside like an egg, its drive core going critical in a blue-white expansion that swallowed 3 nearby destroyers in debris and shrapnel. Report. Vethakaros was on his feet. Shattered mirror is gone, sir. We're reading impacts on Second Dawn, Conqueror's Reach, and Pale Dominance, sir. All 4 contacts have hull breaches. Energy readings are wrong. They're weapons. Our shields should have absorbed. They're not using energy weapons. Serenina's voice carried a new quality in it, one Vethakaros had never heard from this officer before. Something close to fear. The rounds are kinetic, sir. Dense metal projectiles accelerated to high velocity. There's no energy component for our shields to interact with. They're going through the shields as if they aren't there. The bridge went silent. Vethakaros stared at his tactical display. 43 human ships. He had 698. The mathematics had not changed. But in the space of 15 seconds, 5 of his warships were dead or critically disabled, and the humans were still accelerating toward his fleet, pouring fire from weapons his ships had absolutely no defense against. Evasive maneuvers, he said, and his voice was very flat, and very careful. Close to energy weapon range and return fire. Concentrate on their cruisers. What followed was the strangest 9 minutes of Vethakaros's career. The collective fleet, 693 warships after the opening salvo, surged forward to envelope 43 human ships, and the humans did not break. They split into 3 groups and cut directly into the encircling formations, firing as they went, and the kinetic round simply went through everything they hit. Shield ratings were irrelevant. Armor ratings were irrelevant. The tungsten penetrators, later analysis would estimate them traveling somewhere between 0.15 and 0.25 times the speed of light, treated hull material as a suggestion and treated the machinery inside the hull as a target. 9 more collective ships died in those 9 minutes. 31 were damaged, several catastrophically. The human losses were not 0. 3 of their destroyers were hit, too badly enough to take them out of the fight. The humans fought in a way Vethakaros's officers kept describing with a word that translated, roughly, as reckless, close, fast, accepting damage that a rational combatant would withdraw from. 1 human cruiser took 4 direct energy weapon hits that should have ended it, and kept firing. Sir. Torin's voice, very quiet. Their weapons are effective at all ranges, including optimal energy weapons range. We cannot close to where our advantages are meaningful without absorbing fire from weapons that bypass our primary defenses. I see that. Vethakaros watched his display. 40 human ships, 38, now, he corrected himself, they'd lost 2 more, had just killed 14 of his warships and damaged 31 more, and they were circling back for another pass. 14 ships. He had lost 14 ships to a fleet 1/15 his size. Their ammunition, he said. What are the reload rates? How long can they maintain this? Unknown. Tactical is trying to assess. Sir, Sarah 9 stopped. Say it. Sir. We're reading new contacts. Multiple new contacts, coming from, the officer's voice fractured. From below the ecliptic. From deep space approach vectors that, sir, I don't understand these readings. These ships are not on any of our intelligence surveys. They were not here 20 minutes ago. How many? Sarah 9 looked at the display for a long moment. Then, we're still counting, sir. Vethakaros crossed to the tactical station and looked at the display himself. What he saw made something very cold happen in the center of his chest. The contacts were not emerging from any planet or station. They were coming from deep space, from the empty dark below the system's orbital plane, from vectors that suggested they had been waiting out there, lightless and patient, in the void where no one would think to look. The transponder codes were strange. His computer parsed them and returned a message that should have been impossible. It said, Pre-extinction era human warship, designation unknown. Authentication sequence, active. Pre-extinction era. 300 years ago, when the collective had first swept through and humanity had run, the major human government had lost 80% of its fleet in 3 months of fighting. The remainder had scattered. Most had been hunted down in the years that followed. The collective's final count had been thorough. There were no surviving major human warships. There could not be. There was simply nowhere they could have gone. Except apparently there was. They came up out of the dark in a long line, 37 warships that carried no drive signatures, no active sensor emissions, nothing that any system would have flagged as present during the approach, because whatever stealth technology the humans had used, it had kept them invisible not just to his sensors but to his intelligence apparatus for 3 centuries. They were old ships. He could tell from the hull profiles, the design aesthetic, the proportions. These were not built in the past decade or the past century. These were ships from the war, from before the fall, maintained or repaired or perhaps simply so well built that 300 years of waiting had not touched them. And they were big. The 3 largest registered tonnages his system would only list as exceeds maximum classification threshold, which was a technical way of saying they were larger than his dreadnoughts. The lead ship opened a broadcast channel. Not encrypted. Deliberately open, broadcast to every ship in the system, every ship in range. The voice that came through was human, and it was steady, and it said, "This is Admiral Mira Caslin of the UGDS Unconquered. 312 years ago, humanity lost a war. Fleet Command ordered a faction of the remaining fleet to hide, to wait, and to reactivate when the species was endangered enough to justify the risk. We've been tracking the collective's approach for 2 weeks. We've been in this system for 19 hours. To the human colony fleet, stand by. To the collective fleet, you have engaged humanity for the last time. This is your one opportunity to withdraw. I won't extend a second." Vethakaros stared at the channel indicator for 3 seconds. Then he looked at his tactical display. 37 additional human warships, 3 of them larger than anything currently in his fleet, armed with the same kinetic weapons that had just killed 14 of his ships in 9 minutes. Plus the 36 remaining ships of the colony defense fleet. He had 684 warships remaining. The mathematics still favored him, technically. He was also aware, with a clarity that was almost physical, that the mathematics were not the governing factor here. "Open a channel," he said quietly. Torrin looked at him. "Sir?" "Open a channel to the human admiral." He smoothed the front of his uniform. He had never retreated. He had never surrendered. He had never even, in 40 years of command, seriously considered either option. He was considering them now. "We have 684 ships," he said, more to himself than to Torrin. "They have 73. If we maintain engagement they will kill," he did the calculation. "They will kill 4 ships for every one they lose. We will win. And we will send 2,000 dead crew members home in pieces. And we will have won against an enemy that has already been beaten once and has apparently spent 3 centuries waiting for us to come back and try again." He sat down. He was suddenly very tired. "I want to know how many rounds those hidden ships are carrying," he said. "I want to know if they have enough ammunition to kill this entire fleet." It took Saranine 30 seconds to run the analysis. "Sir. If they loaded to full capacity before going dormant, and there's no reason to believe they didn't, they have sufficient kinetic rounds to engage this fleet for approximately 11 hours at sustained fire. We cannot outlast them on ammunition." "Of course not." He almost laughed. 300 years of preparation. Hidden in the dark for 300 years, patient as stone, waiting for a war that might never have come, willing to drift in the cold void indefinitely on the hope that one day it would be necessary. He had never encountered an enemy like this. He was not certain he wanted to encounter it again. "Open the channel." The human admiral's face appeared on the display. She was older, dark eyes in a weathered face, wearing a uniform that matched no current human faction insignia, only the old design, the design from before. She looked at him with the expression of someone who has waited a long time for a particular conversation and is not surprised that it has finally arrived. "Admiral Caslin," Vethakaros said. "I would like to discuss terms." "There are no terms," she said. "There is withdrawal. If you withdraw now, completely, out of this system and back to your nearest staging point, I won't pursue. If you don't, I will destroy this fleet, and I will not lose sleep over it." She paused. "I've had 300 years of sleep. I'm well rested." Vethakaros held her gaze for a moment. Then, Fleet Marshal Torrin. "Signal all ships. Withdrawal formation. We're leaving." He cut the channel. The silence on the bridge was the total silence of people trying to understand what had just happened. Torrin, after a moment, "Sir. We are withdrawing from a numerically inferior force." "We are withdrawing from a tactically superior force," Vethakaros corrected, and he found that the distinction felt important. "There is nothing inferior about them. Record this engagement in detail. Every sensor reading, every tactical calculation, every round they fired. When we get back to command, I want this analyzed. I want someone to explain to me how they hid 37 warships for 300 years. I want someone to explain kinetic weapons and why our shields don't interact with them. And I want someone to explain," he paused, looking at the display one more time as his fleet turned and began the long pull away from the human system, "how a species we thought we had finished continues to look at us like it's already won. The unconquered did not pursue. The colony defense fleet did not pursue. They watched the collective withdrawal in silence, 73 ships in a loose formation near their home worlds, and they did not fire a single shot after the retreating fleet. There was no taunting hail, no victory broadcast, no triumphalist declaration. The humans had won, cleanly and completely, and they simply went back to what they had been doing. The defense ships returning to their patrol patterns, the hidden fleet moving into orbit above the colony worlds like they were parking after a long commute. The final count, when the analysts aboard the withdrawing collective fleet ran the numbers, was stark. The collective had entered the engagement with 698 warships. They left with 684, and of those, 31 were damaged enough to require significant repair. 14 ships destroyed, 2,416 crew killed, in a battle against a force 1/9 their size. The humans had lost 3 destroyers and perhaps 200 crew. The kill ratio was not a rounding error. It was a statement. Vethakaro stood at the observation glass again as Sol's light shrank behind him, and he thought about a species that had spent 3 centuries in the dark waiting for this moment, that had loaded their guns and gone to sleep and trusted that the day would come, that had looked at extermination and called it a temporary setback. He thought about Admiral Caslin's face. Not triumphant, just tired in the particular way of someone who had been right about something for a very long time and found no pleasure in the confirmation. He thought about the word his tactical officer had used, reckless. He was no longer certain it was the right word. The humans had accepted damage because they had calculated that the exchange rate was in their favor. That wasn't recklessness. That was math. Just a different kind of math than his own. He had come to end a species. He had found a species that had already survived being ended once and had spent the intervening centuries building toward the next round. He thought, with a feeling he did not have good words for, that there would be a next round. That there would always be a next round, with these people. That somewhere in the dark beyond the edge of what the collective could map, there were almost certainly more hidden fleets, more patient killers waiting in the cold, more ships loaded and ready and crewed by people who had looked at extinction and refused it as a matter of principle. He was not afraid. He was, for the first time in 40 years, something more uncomfortable than afraid. He was uncertain. Behind him, Sol kept burning. Small and cold and quiet at this distance, like a pilot light that had never gone out.